let's switch the conversation. Let's go running backs, Brian.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about Lance Taylor because I think he's been a great addition to the staff. Overall, I've been very happy with him. I know you've probably got information that I don't have, which is why we're talking about this. But the running back position itself, I think, has the ability to take a real step forward. And that's not saying that it wasn't good last year because Kyren Williams is a 1,000-yard rusher. That's great. He was the threat out of the backfield. That's great. Chris Tyree, we know how great he can be. Obviously you and I think he should have more touches, but I think this is an opportunity this year to get both of those guys on the field. You could have 2,000-yard rushers very easily in this backfield at Notre Dame. How does Lance Taylor make that happen?
I think Lance has definitely added a lot to the depth chart. I mean, I don't think he's a great recruiter yet, but he's certainly a much better recruiter than what Autry Denson was. I mean, that's not saying a whole lot, though. I think coaching-wise, I think he's done a good job so far. I mean, like you said, Tony Jones, if Tony Jones doesn't get hurt, Tony Jones is a 1,000-yard rusher in 2019, and Tony Jones averaged about 0.6 yards more per carry than Kyren Williams did this past year. Actually, the yards per carry for the starting running back went down this year with Kyren Williams, and I don't think that's necessarily on him as much as it is the offensive philosophy, but I think there's another level Notre Dame needs to get to with its running game and its running backs. I mean, Notre Dame last year ranked 29th in the country in yards per attempt at 5.02. Compare that to Ohio State, who was at 5.96. North Carolina was 5.75. I mean, that's a big jump. And when you consider the talent of the Notre Dame offensive line, Alabama, for example, last year averaged 5.0 yards per carry. Okay. Notre Dame was 5.02 yards per carry. So they were very similar. But Alabama's quarterback barely had over 0 yards this last year. Matter of fact, going into the Notre Dame game, he was minus yards, right?
Yeah.
So, let's just, you kind of compare that and you say, well, Ian Book, Notre Dame starting quarterback, averaged 4.2 yards per rush, and he had over 400 yards rushing last year. Alabama starting quarterback, Mac Jones, had a whopping 14 yards at 0.4 yards per carry. So when you look at the running backs, the starting running backs at Alabama, Najee Harris was 5.84 yards per carry. Brian Robinson was at 10.3, and their freshman Jace McClellan was at 10.7 on 23 carries. Chris Tyree was at 6.8 yards per carry, but they just used him as a breather guy.
Yeah.
Tebow was 5.2 and Kyren was 5.3. So it was good, but you were a running team. Alabama was a passing team that would kind of, the run game wasn't always the driving force. So their number 2 aspect was as good as your number 1 aspect.
Right.
That's my issue.
Right.
And so I think there's another level to get to. There's a lot of factors that go into this that don't necessarily have a lot to do with Lance Taylor per se.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely.
But I want to see him. I want to see him do some things. I want to see him as the run game coordinator and as someone who has coached receivers kind of with Tommy Rees to say, hey, let's be more creative. Let's be more explosive. We've got some really talented running backs. Let's figure out ways to use both of them. We use both of them. Kyren's a starter and Chris plays when Kyren needs a breather. We use both of them. That's not what we're talking about. To where I kind of say he's got to have the plan, because you can't expect the head coach to come up with that. You've got to come up with the plan and you've got to make it work, right? So, what are we going to see from Coach Taylor in that regards? As a former receivers coach with a running back that is a former receiver, I think that there's some more I'd like to see him kind of help install into the offense. I mean, remember, he was Christian McCaffrey's coach back at Stanford, and Christian McCaffrey caught a lot of passes. Now, I am not saying Kyren Williams is Christian McCaffrey. He is not. My point, however, is that I know that there's a lot of ideas that he has on how to do that.
Sure.
I'd like to see him really this year be allowed to do that more. And then, of course, come up with ways where you can start getting more out of both of your running backs. I mean, look, North Carolina played basically the same schedule Notre Dame played.
That's true.
And had 2,000-yard running backs last year.
They were the 1-2 punch in the ACC, as they were the 2 first-team All-ACC running backs from the same team.
Yeah. I mean, so you're telling me that Michael Carter, who was the number one rusher yards per game in the ACC, Javonte Williams is number 3. They both averaged over 7 yards a carry. Combined for 28 touchdowns. And guess what? They still threw for over 300 yards a game.
So they were a passing
That's a
team.
Schematic. Well, they were a running team,
okay.
I would argue. But
Right,
because a lot of the stuff they did was RPOs and things like that. But the point being, a team in your league that plays a relatively similar schedule is capable of having that, and it's not Clemson. Okay,
right.
So you can't say, well, these were 5-star recruits and all this other stuff, right? So the point being, both of those guys averaged almost 2 yards more per carry than Kyren Williams, right? He was at 5.3. Then Javonte Williams is at 7.3. Michael Carter was at 8 yards a carry. Okay. Khalil Herbert from Virginia Tech was at 7.7 yards per carry. The point is, in this league, a lot of these other running backs are going for, Duke's top running back was 6.8 yards per carry.
Yeah.
Right. There's a lot of backs averaging a lot high yards per carry relative to Notre Dame, and I don't think it's about talent. So I want to see Coach Taylor kind of have an influence on how are some ways we can create a more explosive ground attack. The pass game is going to be part of that.
Yeah.
Right. The more you have to worry about your running backs out of the backfield and the RPOs and all those other kind of things, then the more dangerous those inside zones. It's kind of like when you look at 2017, part of the reason Josh Adams had such a high yards per carry, it wasn't just that they had a great offensive line, because none of the other backs, had quite that. I mean, Deion McIntosh still got yards, but it wasn't like 7 yards a carry. The reason Dexter and Josh Adams had such a high yards per carry was also when they were in the game. If you watched it, teams were so worried about Brandon Wimbush running the football. I remember the 80-yard touchdown run Josh Adams had against USC. If you go back and watch that play and watch when he gets it's just an inside zone. He cuts behind Alex Bars, the backside linebacker, the overhang defender, and the safety to that side are all running at Brandon Wimbush as Josh Adams is running vertically. So those were things that the system itself allowed those opportunities, because those safeties couldn't just key on Josh Adams.
Yeah.
That's gone now because, number one, you don't have Brandon Wimbush at quarterback from a running standpoint. But number two, that's where the RPOs and the different things like that come into play, where, you're running an inside zone and you got Chris Tyree on a swing route opposite Kyren Williams running that inside zone. You got to worry about that, because if you don't, you throw a quick screen pass or a quick swing pass to Chris Tyree, he's catching it, getting up the sideline for a home run. So they have to do things that keep the defense more occupied, because if safeties have to take an extra second before they can fly downhill, that extra second is the difference between Kyren Williams going for 10 and Kyren Williams going for 50. Yep. Or Chris Tyree going for 10 or Chris Tyree going for 80.
Yep.
You get what I'm saying? So I put a lot of that on Coach Taylor, because he's proven to be able to generate that kind of explosiveness out of the backfield. And, I want to see him be able to bring that to Notre Dame. I love what he's done so far. Fundamentally sound. Guys improve each year. This is a big year for him, because you've got a returning starter that's a very good back, second-team All-American Sporting News, and you've got one of the most explosive players in the entire country in your running backfield. If you can't get production from that, you got at some point in time, you got to stop blaming the players.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
well, I'm sorry. They need to stop blaming the players a long time ago. But that's another podcast.
Yeah.
Right down.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you. Look, Lance Taylor, he's the run game coordinator, right? I mean, he has that title, so he's got to say. It's not like he's just a position coach who is beholden to everything else that's going on around him, and all he's worried about is, are they taking the handoff the correct way, right? He is the offensive offensive run game coordinator. So there has to be some blame isn't the right word, but he has a responsibility to make sure that the run game is operating at the most peak efficiency, and it's not yet. I mean, that's the bottom line. It's not. And all you have to do is look in the conference, right? And so, as you did, and I'm hoping that, again, he has the gravitas, he has the stones, whatever you want to say, to go to Tommy Rees and be like, look, this is what we need to do with the run game. I've got two thoroughbreds back here who need to get touches. We need to get them the ball. Let's think of some creative ways to get both of them involved in this offense.
So from what my sources have told me over the last year is that Tommy Rees and Lance Taylor have a very good relationship.
Beautiful.
Very open.
Yeah.
They listen to each other. They talk to each other. So I don't think Lance Taylor going in there and having ideas would be an issue. It's just more about them coming up with things to then take it to the boss man and say, this is what we need to do. Like, there needs to be this unified front of, yes, we need to push the tempo more. No, we do not need to be Oregon under Chip Kelly. Right.
Right.
But if North Carolina can do this in the ACC, why the freaking heck can't we do this in the ACC? And then you start doing what North Carolina is doing with the talent that Notre Dame has, not just at the skill players, but on the offensive line. Because no one's talking about North Carolina's offensive linemen being, day one and day two draft picks like they're talking about Notre Dame's offensive linemen, right? And Sam Howell's a good football player. He's not Trevor Lawrence. So you can't use that, of course Clemson's good because they have Trevor Lawrence. Well, Sam Howell ain't Trevor Lawrence.
Right.
Okay? He's a good player. Don't get me wrong, but you're telling me that Drew Pine and Tyler Buckner and all the guys that Notre Dame recruits year after year can't be that? Yeah, they can.
Yes, they can.
It's just they've committed to a system that allows them to do that. And then you have Notre Dame's defense doing what they do. That's the recipe that we keep talking about. So,
right.
That's where they are. And that's where I say it's a big year for Coach Taylor to be able to say, okay, now go get that done. You look at his last year at Stanford, Christian McCaffrey averaged 6.3 yards per carry. Bryce Love was a 7.1. Right, had over 700 yards rushing. So he showed even
together in the same back,
right. And so, you had the best running back in the country, and you were still able top 10 NFL draft pick, who some have argued is the best running back in the NFL, and you still found a way to get your number 2 back, some playing time. So, and some productive playing time. So, I think that it's a situation where it's now year 3 for him. It's time for him to be able to step up and say, hey, let's go get this thing done. And you look at it, that was McCaffrey's junior year, was Bryce Love's sophomore year. The year before, Christian McCaffrey had over 2,000 yards, and the next highest running back was Barry Sanders at 315.
Yeah,
kind of similar to what we saw.
Just saying
this year. So, but then Bryce Love as a freshman only had 29 carries, averaged 7.8 yards a carry.
Yeah.
That's not what, he did. Chris Tyree, similar, type situation. So the next year, Bryce Love became a much more used weapon, and they had a dynamic backfield. And and again, part of that was, if you go back and look, Bryce Love got some production when Christian McCaffrey was out.
Sure.
And so it's kind of, it can be a little misleading, that production.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't all done with them together.
Yeah.
Kind of like the CJ Prosise, Josh Adams 1-2 punch in 2015 for Notre Dame. So, but at the same time, there were some games where they both played and they both had production. So that's what I want to see from the Notre Dame backfield this year. And Lance Taylor's got to be a big part of that. He needs to utilize his relationship with Tommy Rees to say, let's build around these strengths, and then let's kind of get together and go to the boss man and say, hey, coach, this is what we need to do. There's no reason we can't be scoring on the same level that North Carolina is scoring, especially since we have a defense that can make more stops.
Good call.